Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. Okay, it's time to begin. Let's start a countdown. 20, 19, 18, 17. I just start the song.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. My guest today is J. Warner Wallace. As you know, he's not only a regular guest on the show, but he has been a Los Angeles homicide detective for many years, and he's been featured on Dateline. He's a best-selling author. He is also an adjunct professor of apologetics at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola. Many other pretty impressive credentials. I think the thing he likes best is being a granddad to his sleeping grandchild at his house right now. Jim, how are you?
Can't believe you laid me out like that.
I had to.
It's awesome. This is the best season of life. And there are seasons.
Yeah.
You know what I tell people all the time, especially like Christian speakers, but we're called, right? We're called to something. And you feel like you want to contribute to the church, you want to contribute to the culture. But there are these seasons, and if you aren't careful as a guy, you will miss your old age altogether because you'll work right through it. When it's kind of cool to be a grandparent, and I've got my kids here 4 days a week, and it's been a blast. It's the best season of life for sure.
Really fun. Now you have how many kids? Do you have three?
I have four, 2 boys, 2 girls.
Okay.
And so far I've got 3 grandchildren. So. Okay. It's been awesome.
And how many grandkids do you have right now at the house?
I have 3. At the house. I have 2. So I've got 2 of them here right now, and they're both down for naps. This is the window of opportunity right here. Yep.
Well, if they wake up and you have to leave us, I'm sure Wyatt and I can cover the hour. It won't be a good hour, but we'll cover it.
I can let Emma come in here and just do the rest of the hour.
Okay.
So I'm sure that'll be very entertaining.
And how old is Emma?
2, almost 3.
That'll be interesting.
It'll be fun. Yep, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking every time I have you on, I think of people that you have exposed who killed in their life. They murdered somebody, and then they went on to live for who knows how long, sometimes up to 30 years, blending into the world around us. And I just had this idea: are we starting as Christians? Are we starting to look like the rest of the world in general?
Probably for a long time.
Okay.
I mean, isn't that, if you look at like scripture, like Paul is constantly talking about, so this is happening heresy was coming up almost immediately.
Okay.
That's how strong our human nature is, right? That not only will we live as though Christianity isn't true, but then we'll even distort and twist Christianity to fit our uses, right? Like what our preferences are. And that's been going on from the very, very beginning. I was talking to my son about this. We have a tendency to think that Christianity kind of started like a tree trunk, and then it branched off into heresies. But it happened so soon, it's almost like a field of grass that's growing, and you've got to kind of trim back to the one true blade, because so many competing ideas about who Jesus was and how everyone's trying to twist. And it's not just Christianity. It's every other worldview. Let's just say you just limit to politics. You've got people trying to twist their party into what they want it to be. So I think it's just our human nature to corrupt anything we touch. And if that's not an evidence for the fallen nature of humans, this is what the culture says. The culture says that the systems are what's corrupting innately good people. These people are innately good, and they are ruined by bad families and systems and governments and environments. But the Christian worldview says just the opposite, right? It turns out we are the ruiners of systems and governments and families and environments, and it's because of our fallen nature. And I think that one of the environments we have a tendency to want to ruin is Christianity.
Jim, as I've had conversations with people in the last month or so, I'm hearing a lot of the same answers. I'm really stressed out. I'm exhausted. I'm super busy, and I can't catch a break. And these are Christians talking to me, and it seems that they're having the same kind of response I would expect people who aren't followers of Jesus are having. And it just kind of caused me concern in the last month.
Yeah, and if I even answer this question, I'm going to divide even my own friends, right? So we have a tendency within this Christian apologetics or Christian worldview community of speakers. We want, especially after Charlie Kirk was killed, we are, what do we do next? What are we called to do? Do we need to all band together and be even more vigilant? Like, what do we need to do? And for me, I struggle with it because I never saw, yes, is to take courage. Of course, it takes courage to take a stand in culture. But I came from working nearly close to 3 decades of just dealing with local issues as a warrior. That's what law enforcement does. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road. And I think that the guys and gals who are still working in law enforcement, those are still the culture warriors that have to go out there every day and risk their life. And if I told you, I don't know if we have time for this, but I'm going to do it anyway. If I told you there was a guy, this is how quickly we forget, and we are consumed by the news cycle. There was a guy who was murdered on September 10th, and his job was basically, for the most part, he spent his job communicating with people. That was a large part of his job, and he was good at it, and he got better the more he did it. And there were times when most of the people he'd be talking to, they were in an adversarial role sometimes, but he would just talk to them. And one day, when talking to one of the hundreds and hundreds of conversations he'd had in the past, he was killed. He was shot in the neck on September 10th, and he really was killed pretty much instantly. But they got him to the hospital, and he didn't survive, died in the hospital. He left behind a young marriage, young children, a young daughter, an even younger child, a boy. And at 31 years of age, he was killed. And that was all on video. They captured it on video. They even captured the escape route of the killer on video. And there was a huge public outcry. They called him a martyr. They had a huge televised memorial for him. You might have seen it. It's even available right now on YouTube. You can watch it. His wife was very courageous, said that she wanted to extend the legacy of her husband. She was applauded for that. And already, no one knows his name. Every single person has forgotten who he is. Because it's not Charlie Kirk. This guy was killed in the same way, shot in the neck, on September 10th, 2024. His name was Jaime Roman. He was a Philadelphia police officer. And nobody remembers him. In that month that he was killed, another 16 died in the line of duty. That year, nearly 170 died in the line of duty. And that was a very light year for law enforcement on-duty deaths. Yet nobody remembers any of those people. You can't name a single one. And to me, I'm like, okay, I get it. We are in a battle. And it's forces of good and forces of evil. There's an entire body of people out there doing this work that nobody cares about at all. And it feels like, okay, we got to keep our priorities where they ought to be. And so for me, I'm kind of committed to trying to serve a group right now. That's the group I'm trying to serve, that I feel like they really are on the front lines. And everybody wants to defund them. Nobody likes a cop. I get it, right? I mean, if you look at the nature of God in culture, first responders embody the nature of God. God is the fullness of truth and grace, justice and mercy. Cops are the truth and justice side, okay? Mm-hmm. Firemen are the grace and mercy side. Everyone loves them. A fireman, nobody wants to have a police officer in their rearview mirror. So I think I get it. But for me, I feel like, okay, now is the time. Now, by the way, Bill, this does not answer your question about how we deal with the anxiety we're feeling. Right. But I do know that the battle lines are on the streets, and we're going to have to do something to support, I think that law enforcement still is the one necessary profession upon which every other profession is contingent. And, you're talking to a cop, so that's probably what you're going to hear.
Yeah. White and I both mouthed the word wow in the studio when you were telling that story about that officer that was shot. Repeat his name one more time for us.
Jaime Roman, like the Roman Empire.
Okay.
And you can look him up, and it was 2024. Wow. Died September 10th, 2024. 31 years old, shot in the neck, entire thing recorded. Everything I just said was true. And he was a man of faith, a man of family, just
Wow.
exactly. I mean, the parallels are just scary. And I guess what that illustrates for me is that we are in such an active, over the top information culture. And that's why everyone who's listening right now is feeling anxious. There's a part of me that says I need to know what's going on in the world, but I only need to know so much. Because if you look at how we were, if you were our parents' generation didn't even have access to this information. Bad things were still happening in that culture too,
Hmm.
but we just weren't aware of all the minutia and the daily back and forth and who's saying what and who said that. And I mean, now we've got all these conspiracy theories and oh my gosh, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that would not exist to the level it does if we could rewind ourselves before internet, before cell phones, smartphones, all the things that have amplified the immediacy of the moment. And there's a point at which I actually think that Gen Z and then Gen Alpha after them are going to voluntarily disconnect from all of this because it's not good.
Hmm.
We'll look back at this the same way we look back at COVID and go, boy, do you remember when we were all stressed out? I don't know. I don't think this is necessarily a genie we can't put back in the bottle.
Hmm. Jim, when you talked about police, and I've seen clips on the internet of people giving policemen incredible attitude when they get pulled over. And I think, well, there's rebellion there, but I also grew up with having a lot of respect for authority, and I don't think I would ever kind of talk the way I see people talking to police officers today.
Well, and I think, look, a lot of no one, we see levels of corruption all the time. And this is in every organization because again, humans destroy and ruin everything they touch, including the profession of law enforcement.
Hmm.
So I think the standard here for law enforcement has to be higher than any other employee standard. I just think it does because we are the one necessary profession upon which all other professions are contingent. So we have to have the highest standard. We just do. And no one hates a corrupt cop more than a cop who's not corrupt. So I think that what you've seen sometimes in culture is a response to something that you think is a misbehavior on the part of cops. Great. It's because we all recognize that this is one profession that cannot be contaminated. And I think it's a high bar, and it's really hard to find anybody because, by the way, we don't hire perfect people. The people we hire are no more perfect than they are in any other profession.
Hmm.
It's just that the standard has to be higher. So you're almost setting yourself up for failure by joining because you're still just a human and you are going to make mistakes. But now the level of what the kind of mistake you might make is so much more dire, right? So I think it is a terrible. I almost wish there was some way to take humans out of it because I just think it's a terrible profession, and all we deal with is people who have been involved in critical incidents. Our work with marriage resiliency, and most of the time you're like going, wow, would you want your? I don't know that I want my grandchildren to be part of this. And we're 3 generations in working in law enforcement. My
Yeah.
dad, my son, me, but I'm not sure I would want my grandkids to be a part of it because it's a calling though. Romans 13, the word used for those who administer justice is the same word that's used for those who are ministers of the gospel. So it's only that word for servant is only used for 2 groups: church leaders and people who administer justice. And so I think that there's a sense in which if you don't see this as a calling, and by the way, most of the cops I know, they do see it as a calling, even though they have no idea who the caller is,
Oh, wow.
right? So it's important to
Hmm.
introduce people who think their work is a calling. If you can introduce them, if you want to turn the head of culture, you'll turn it fastest by turning the neck of first responders. Because the first responders are the first face that anyone has to your culture.
Hmm.
Who shows up at your door in an emergency tells you a lot about where you're living. And imagine if every one of those was a surrendered Christ follower who adopted the same transcendent, objective moral standard that's in Scripture. At least you'd be able to call them to that standard together because they would be. So that's why I say we have to help get the gospel out to people who are kind of providing the foundation of first responders to our culture.
So interesting. I'm fascinated, Jim, with the work you do in the summertime with police officers and their spouses this resiliency conferences or seminars, or I don't know what they're called in Alaska that you do, how lucky they would be and blessed they would be to have you as a moderator and teacher.
Well, and we just dumbed into it, right? We kind of slowly volunteered our way through Operation Heal Our Patriots, which is another Samaritan's Purse, and then we just ended up at the Franklin Graham asked us if we would kind of take the lead here for a season, because everything's for a season, right? So we thought, well, I wasn't even sure what that would mean, but what I realized as I'm doing it is, look, we can't even hire nationally. We have a crisis in hiring police officers. And really, since George Floyd, since the pandemic, nobody really wants to do the job anymore, and I don't blame them. And so now the question becomes, how do we get qualified candidates? And then what do we do when they suffer the kind of trauma that you're inevitably going to suffer? I mean, we get people up there who have been shot, who are getting retired medically. They don't want to be retired. They don't want their careers to end, but they can't do the job anymore. And so what do you do with these folks? And I think it is we're going to have to address it. I do see some legislation coming through that's going to probably try to start addressing it. But in the end, if you think we can defund first responders, we probably need to rethink that.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to take a little break and be right back. If you have a question or comment for Jim, let me know what it is. 877-933-2484. You can learn more about Jim at coldcasechristianity.com. His most recent book is Case Files Number 1, Murder and Meaning. It's an amazing book. And if you want to check out coldcasechristianity.com, it's all there, in addition to some podcasts and some free material and videos and books and everything else. Check it out, coldcasechristianity.com. We'll be right back. You might be the kind of person that goes to Paris and still listens to Faith Radio on the app. And I'm thinking of a particular couple from northern Minnesota. Or you might be more like the person that just goes into the next room in your apartment and listens. Well, the good news is using the app is just as easy in both places. Downloading the free app is crazy easy. Just text the word app to 877-933-2484 and then click the link. And if you happen to be in Paris, there is a coffee shop, but you should see the prices of biscotti. They have gone through the roof. I recommend avoiding it. Welcome to the show. If you just joined me, I've got J. Warner Wallace as my guest. Learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. I encourage you to go there and check it out. Jim, Wyatt and I were just saying during the break how much that story just had an impact on us, because there's so many people out there in first responder roles doing amazing work every day, and we don't know their names, and they're sacrificing their lives. It's unbelievable.
Well, and again, I'm always afraid that I never want to minimize the tragedy of what we saw this year.
Of course not.
And this is why we're all feeling so anxious, right? We're feeling like, hey, is the world changing in a way that we can never? And I do kind of worry about that too. Are we starting to blur the lines to the point? Are we so radicalized on each edge of our positions that there's no reasonable middle anymore? That now we determine like who's in our family and who's out of our family, who is our friend, who's not our friend, on the basis of the degree to which they agree with us. Mm-hmm. Like, if we lost the art of befriending those with whom we disagree.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this kind of social media is only just amplifying that, right? And there's a risk in this that is do we want to raise our kids? Would you raise your kids this way? They're watching us. Didn't it used to be that we would try to raise our kids with principles that were just the opposite of this? But now we kind of embrace these as adults, and so I'll just tell you that I get all the time. I get asked, "Well, are you going to jump in the game? Are you going to be more politically active?" Well, I think I'm just going to be more gospel focused for sure.
I like that.
And I think each of us has got an identity. I have a lane I can run in. I mean, I'm not a medical professional who can relate to other doctors, but I am a guy who served in law enforcement, and that's the narrow lane that I can run in. And so those are the kinds of things I talk about. Those are the kinds of people I'm interested in trying to help. And I also, you have to do it in the context of your family structure, the season of life you're in. I didn't start writing books until I was 52. So here we are a dozen years later, and now I'm in my 60s. And so I think if I was in my 30s, it'd be different. But I'm now in my 60s, and I have a role to play in my own family as a grandfather that I just don't want to miss.
Mm-hmm.
I'm J. Warner Wallace because my grandfather, it was Warner Wallace. And he meant something to me, so much so that I wanted to carry his. There are a ton of Warners in our family, which is a crazy name that no one's got that name. Who would name their kid Warner? We get a ton of these kids because he was such an impact
Mm-hmm.
that there's a David Warner, there's a Samuel Warner, I mean, all these Warners because of this one man. And I think that that's an opportunity I don't want to miss either.
Yeah. Do you know the Kyle Rote Sr. story?
No, I don't. Tell me.
Well, Kyle Rote Sr. was an amazing football player with the Baltimore team, and he was so beloved by his teammates that 11 players on the team named their sons Kyle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that, I mean, and again, it's not like you're saying, well, I want this self-adoration, I want this,
right.
my family to love, but in the end, it turns out, if you think about it, Bill, who knows you better than your family? Who knows you better than your spouse?
No one.
So right. So if my job is to get the people who don't know me at all to think something of me, I mean, in the end, you can ask your family, what was he really like? And at the end of it, I don't want them to say, well, what was Jim like as a husband? Well, he was okay. Or what was he like as a dad? Well, he's all right.
Yeah.
No, you want people to know that you saw them. In that passage in Paul's letter where he talks about how, look, if you can remain single, do it because you can serve God in a way that you can't if you're married. He says it basically. But if you're somebody whose temptations are such that you're going to sin, then get married. But what that means is you got to ask yourself, I think we as Christians, we're called to do something, to a mission, to a ministry. And for a lot of us, that's going to be something on in the mission field, like Paul. But for a lot of us who decided to get married, well, then that's our ministry. What I see us doing sometimes is we get married and then we continue to think we can work like Paul. Well, Paul wasn't married.
Right.
You've got a mission field.
Yeah.
You've got a ministry. It's either out there sharing the gospel or it's your family. You have made a choice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for us as men, it often feels like our families are not ministry enough.
Mm-hmm.
Our families are not mission enough. And if you're not a Christian, we often feel like our families are not, they don't satisfy that itch of my purpose and meaning in life.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out if we form a family and we create a family, I want to be all in.
Yeah. Perfect. I want to go back to a comment you made about agreeing and disagreeing with people nowadays. Why is it important, Jim, that you agree with me? There's 8 billion people in the world. I don't need another opinion.
No, actually, I don't have to agree with you. That's the whole point.
I know, but it seems like people are knocking heads.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think I love the fact that we don't even know all the ways we don't agree, Bill, right? Because some of these areas we don't even probe.
Right.
But if we do disagree, the question is, let's say I love you at a scale right now. Here's the scale of which I love Bill Arnold. Okay, got it. Now, if I discovered all the ways that we disagree, is the number going to drop? It shouldn't.
Right.
It shouldn't. So that's what we've lost is not. But this is the problem: is we think we must agree. No, we don't. We don't need to agree. By the way, there is no chance for us to practice tolerance at all unless we disagree. Because what is required for tolerance is a disagreement. So if you value tolerance, then we have to hold on to the fact that we disagree. Tolerance is not being a jerk to the people with whom you don't agree.
Right.
If you think that tolerance is having to agree with everyone, well, that's not, you don't need tolerance to it when you agree with somebody. You need tolerance when you don't. And I think that part of it is that we've lost the ability to love people who are different than us. We are real, especially when it comes to politics.
Yeah. And the word tolerance has certainly been hijacked and reworked, and I don't recognize it anymore.
Well, yeah, it really means today that you must see every single view as equally meritorious.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hold a view, if I don't embrace it as being absolutely equally valuable and meritorious to my view, then I'm not being tolerant of you. But of course, that's ridiculous, right? Because we would say, oh, if I said to you, okay, here's my view. My view is that it's okay to disagree, and that some people hold bad ideas, and you ought to reject them. That's what I think tolerance is.
Hmm.
Can you accept my view? They would say, well, no, that's not what I think tolerance is. Well, wait a minute. Your view says that every view has to be equally correct, has to be embraced as equally correct. Yet you can't embrace my view as equally correct as yours. So already you can't hold to your own standard of tolerance. So it is self-refuting, and eventually it kind of eats itself, right? Because they would have to reject a view, but their view says you cannot reject a view. You have to agree with me. But they already disagree with me because I don't think I have to agree with you. So there's the whole problem. See, so I think everyone ends up having to deal with the issue with it because the definition doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I look in the end. So how do we? Let's go back to that first question you asked. Okay, we're all feeling anxious. What is the solution? I think what I've realized now, 64 years in, is that in those decades where my job was consuming me, where I could not look up, right? Because our caseload was just so crazy that I didn't even know what was happening in culture. I didn't watch like sports for like a good 15 years. I didn't have time to watch sports. I didn't start watching sports again until I retired. I mean, I just didn't have time while I was working. And I didn't pay attention. I mean, while I was working, all the crazy stuff happened, right? 9/11, we certainly had all kinds of global concerns, all kinds of things to worry about. They were all there 15 years ago. I just couldn't pay attention. Now, I knew enough about my positions to still vote. I think I still voted responsibly. I knew enough to vote, but I wasn't paying attention on a day-to-day basis because I couldn't. I think I was happier. But now that
I
I
bet
have
you were.
time to
Yeah.
pay attention to
Hmm.
all the so here's my question, folks. How much do you really need to pay attention to this?
I think it's a great point, Jim. It's a
You know,
great
at
point.
some point, just let go of it and return to, because it turns out the next 10 years are going to go by, whether you're like in every single twist and turn and fighting with your family online, or if you're just one of those people who's like, yeah, I'm not really paying attention to that right now because I've got a 2-year-old who I'm playing with today.
Hmm.
And I think in the end, that is a way. Now, of course, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to know what we believe and why we believe it. And if you press me, of course, I'm going to be able to defend why I think the Christian worldview is true and what its moral claims are also true. So I'm prepared to defend what I believe. But at the same time, I don't feel like I need to respond to every little movement of culture that's occurring online. Because in the end, we have just so much time, Bill. You are stealing that time from somebody else and something else in order to pay attention to the thing you're paying attention to
That's
today.
so true.
Where am I stealing the time from? I find that when I was in my 30s, I felt like I could steal time from like your family, or no, I don't have that time to steal anymore. That's a very limited commodity. And time is the thing of value for me. And I'm
Hmm.
just not going to be able to waste it arguing about every little detail.
Such wisdom, Jim. It's so good. I appreciate that perspective, and I'm so glad you said it out loud today.
Well, and I know I'm going to take a lot of abuse for that because I run with a crowd that's like, Jim, why aren't you more involved? Why aren't you more involved? Well, because it turns out I still cry over things in my family. I still feel deeply connected to my responsibilities as a parent, as a husband, as a grandparent.
Hmm.
Those are the things where I think regret is going to reside. I don't think I'm ever going to go back and say, boy, I wish I could have done more events. I wish I could have made a bigger commitment to my online presence to be able to make the case for this or that or
Hmm.
whatever. I think in the end, regret does not live on your social media. It doesn't live in your business. It doesn't live in your mission. It doesn't live in your ministry. Regret almost always lives in your home. So in the end, I get to the end of this, I want to be able to know that I shepherded and mentored and guided my family to the best of my ability.
That's lovely. All right, we're going to take a short break. Thank you for the comments you're sending over to the website. If you have a question for Jim, 877-933-2484. And go learn more about Jim at coldcasechristianity.com. Be right back. My guest today is J. Warner Wallace. You can find out more about Jim at coldcasechristianity.com. And Wyatt and I were just during the break talking about the line you said, regret almost always takes place in the home. And boy, that we thought about that and we said, yeah, that is so, so good. And we always have probably, like you say, our most regret family, marriage, kids, grandkids, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not like how do you learn? Where does wisdom come from? If you think about, we talk about the nature of wisdom. Most of the time, it comes from one component for sure is knowledge, but another component is failure. And almost all wisdom comes from things you've train wrecked, and you go, "Oh, I'm never going to do that again."
Mm-hmm.
Or you want to talk to somebody who maybe has had their share of failures in a particular area, because not only do they have knowledge about how to succeed, but they've learned something from their failures. And the problem with age is that anyone who you think might say something wise, it's probably not coming because they did this thing perfectly. It's coming because they've got tons of regrets. And like they're looking back at it and they're saying, hey, don't you do the same thing the way that I did it. And so that's why I say that it's not usually if anyone says something you think is wise, it's because they realize it by their own failures, that by their own regrets. Like they go back and this weird economy for us changes, right? You have these two things of value, money and time. And when you're young, you know, you're willing to exchange your time for money because you need to pay your bills, you need to pay your mortgage, support your family. So suddenly you're like, okay, I got to work 60 hours this week, but we have to pay the bills. So that's the thing I need. That's the thing of most value. Well, if you kind of work through your life and you hopefully get to a place where you're in your older age and now maybe your mortgage is paid and you had 35 years of paying the bills, and now suddenly it flips. What's of value to you is not money, because what am I, it's time.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't buy that. You can use time to get money, but you can't use money to get time. And so now the thing that becomes valuable to me as an older guy is like, what am I going to do with my life in the next? And you know what I've noticed, and maybe you have too, is that like kids are waiting longer to have. We waited until we were in our late 20s before we had our first. And my son waited until he was in his 30s to have his first. So that means that I was thinking about this when I was a kid. My grandfather, when I was born, he was in his 40s.
Wow.
His mid 40s.
Wow. Your
Right? Because
grandfather.
because he had a child at 21 and his kid had a child at 21. So
Yeah.
he's now 42 with a grandson.
Wow.
And so I knew my grandfather really well. I did his
Mm-hmm.
funeral when he passed because I knew him for years. I mean, the more formative years when I was a teenager, he was in his 50s.
Wow.
Well,
Wow.
I'm 64. I will never probably know my granddaughter's spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, if I could buy back 15 years right now, I'd love to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't do it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that means that I've got to make a decision about what I'm going to be obsessed about. And you know what I've also learned as a grandparent is that the thing I missed as a parent, because I was gone so much and I was always exhausted when I got home, it felt like, is that all she wants me to do is be present. Like I don't need to do something for her or give her something or show her a good time. I just need to hang out with her and be present. So it's a time issue. It's not, we always say, well, I try to give my kids quality time. Well, good. But it's really about quantity time too.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how much time am I willing to sit still and just do a bunch of nothing,
Yeah.
because it's what she wants to do.
Yeah. It's interesting what kids remember too when it comes to their parents, where the dad might say, do you remember when I took you to the World Series game? And the kid goes, and not really, but I do remember the time we caught that salamander in the backyard.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's exactly true. And I kind of always knew that as a younger
Yeah.
as a dad, but it just practically speaking, I mean, the first time commitment priority was work. I just had to be. And I was working homicides. So those things are very unpredictable. It seems like everyone's going to kill somebody on a holiday. Christmas, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I got called out on holidays. And it's very unpredictable, middle of the night kind of stuff
Wow.
always. So that made it probably worse. It wasn't a straight like 9 to 5 kind of a thing. But that's why now as an old guy, I'm like, okay, so this is the season in which I cannot. I had a career. Okay, I'm retired. I didn't start writing about Christianity or writing about Christian case making or the case for Christianity until I was already retired. And by the way, Susie waited a lot of years for me to retire, not to start a whole new career where I'm going to be gone even more than I was before.
Right.
So there's like a season, right, for all of us. All I'm saying to anyone who's listening is, hey, if you can figure out a way to save and save and what is financial independence? Remember, it's not the ability to buy anything, it's the ability to buy anything you want. And I don't want anything, so I got to financial independence pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. I love that
So
line. I've
because
used that several times, crediting you, because I think that's a perfect line.
Well, and it's just the truth of it, and what's going to give you freedom. The freedom to sit in the backyard with a hose with your grandkids
Hmm.
for an hour and a half, or to build a fort
Yeah.
with tarps over over your furniture in the backyard.
Hmm.
Just the kind of stupid things you do when you're a grandfather and you got 3 hours and we're going to be hanging out in the backyard for the next 3 hours,
Yeah.
right? So, and that's the stuff I never did as a dad because I felt like there was just no margin to do that kind of stuff.
Hmm. On the coldcasechristianity.com website, you talked about why guilt is so much better than shame. And I thought, well, I'm going to ask you that. And we don't have to spend a lot of time with it, but I find it fascinating.
Well, and a lot of that came out of our work up with the officers in Alaska because they've all been involved in that their marriage. It's a marriage resiliency retreat, so it's
Hmm.
really about marriage, and so that's what the focus is. And what we see is that the culture, when you read about like articles online, that those two things seem to be conflated sometimes. Like they don't, there's not a strong understanding of the difference between guilt and shame. But if you look at this research on it, and we did this for the book The Truth and True Crime, it's one chapter of that book. It talks about the difference because they'll look at what's called guilt is called an adaptive emotion, whereas shame is called a maladaptive emotion. And so, even in secular research, secular kind of psychology, you'll see that these two things are separated. What they mean is that you can leverage guilt toward a good end because guilt is when you realize that you've done something wrong, and that often prompts us then to make amends, to go out and try to correct, to be repentant, to want to change our behavior going forward, to want to make amends with whoever we've offended. Shame is very different. So the difference, how I think the best way to describe it is guilt is about feeling bad about something you've done. Shame is feeling bad about you. Guilt says I messed up. Shame says I'm a mess up.
Mm.
Very different, very
Hmm.
different. Guilt can be leveraged towards something good. Shame almost always is just a corrosive acid that eventually destroys you because you feel, and you can be, by the way, you can feel shame over something you didn't even do. You can feel shame connected to your family, connected to where you live, connected to your circumstances that are beyond your control, something that was done to you. I mean, shame is really nasty in the sense that it is destructive, and it often doesn't have anything to do with what you've done, whereas guilt is about things you've done. Now, it turns out that the Christian worldview has an answer and can leverage both. Here's what I mean. So your guilt is addressed by forgiveness, the forgiveness that Jesus offers on the cross. That yes, you know you've done things wrong. All of us, if we're honest, we've even violated whatever standards we said were valuable. We can't even hold to our own standards. And if there's a holy, righteous God who's all powerful, he has the power to eliminate every kind of imperfection, including his own moral imperfection. Therefore, we do not worship a good God. We worship a morally perfect God. Now, there's the problem. I've had good days. I've never had a morally perfect day. So we know that there are things that we have done wrong. Well, that's answered because the punishment that's due us for what we've done wrong has been taken by Jesus on the cross. That alone frees us because we no longer are seen as the guilty sinner before a holy God. He looks at us and he sees Jesus in our place.
Hmm.
So it addresses the issue of all guilt. Now, shame, well, all of those who find themselves in Christ Jesus, there is no condemnation in Christ Jesus. We see this in the book of Romans. So it turns out that the shame is, but you have a new identity. To the extent that you might feel like, yeah, I'm a Wallace and I'm a mess and I feel ashamed. Well, you're no longer a Wallace. You're now in Christ. And of course he has nothing to be ashamed of. And therefore, if you're in him, you have nothing to be ashamed of either. You surrendered your identity for his identity. And what that means is everything that you thought was the meaning of life, was the purpose of life, was the stuff that was worth giving your all to, that changes when you become a Christian. It's his purposes, his meanings, his values that become yours. And all so both things are addressed at the cross, right? The guilt issue and the shame issue are completely addressed. And that's why so many people find themselves meeting God for the first time at the worst time of their lives. It's not just a crutch for weak people. It's actually a solution for those who know they've done wrong, who feel ashamed. And that, if you think about it, that's all of us. And if you're the kind of person who says, well, I've never felt that way, well, then you're so self-obsessed. You haven't really examined your own nature yet. But I think and that's why the first step to all of this in the Christian worldview is that crazy thing called humility. Nothing in the Christian worldview begins until you stop and say, you know what, there is a God and I'm not him. That first step is a step of humility. And this is why Jesus personifies humility all the way. I'm reading through John chapter, I think it's chapter 5 right now. And in chapter 5, it's the first long discourse of Jesus. And he's talking about how he clearly has all of the power of God, yet he says he submits to the Father. So it's Jesus, God coming incarnate and modeling for us the kind of humility that's going to be required for us if we want to love God. So in the end, I think that the answer for both guilt and shame is that first step of humility in bending your knee to a holy God.
That's amazing. J. Warner Wallace is my guest. Go to coldcasechristianity.com. That is his website, coldcasechristianity.com. We're going to take a break and be right back. Hi, podcast listener. You know, I'm Bill Arnold, and my theme song says, "What's for dinner?" And like when I'm grilling, I'm paying really close attention. And I know that ideal second to get the food off the grill. Like all good and ideal timings in life, right now would be an ideal time to be a cheerful giver to Faith Radio. Give now to support this podcast so that more people in more places might come to saving faith in Jesus and grow in their relationship and become a fully devoted follower. Click the link in the show notes or give now at myfaithradio.com. My guest today is J. Warner Wallace. You can learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. Got a nice note, Jim, on the text line. I want to just say thank you to Jim Wallace for his insights and truth at the Stand for Reason Reality Conference this weekend. I really appreciated the section on suffering and how it actually causes thriving if we strive in the power of the Holy Spirit and in God to make things better. Thank you so much.
That was an awesome, as you know, Stand to Reason does an amazing job at these reality conferences, 6 annually. We had over 4,100 students.
Wow.
Last weekend there in Minneapolis.
Amazing.
We are seeing what some people are calling the Charlie Kirk effect, right? This idea that young people are leading the way, especially young men leading the way in this revival that we're seeing across the nation. And we are seeing it also in the Stand to Reason conferences. It's not just that everything is sold out this year. It's that when you get there, students are just so passionate. And you see it in the worship segments of the conference, and you see it in all the teaching segments. Yeah, and I feel like this is my last year doing reality, right? Because for me, I feel like at 64, if I'm going to talk the talk about the season I'm in and what I want to do next with my own family, I've got to walk the walk. And so a lot of these things have to kind of start to slow down intentionally. But I always feel like when I go to these conferences, they're so gracious to me because I'm by far, but there's only like one guy who's older than me in the entire conference, right? And so I feel like the chance to get to talk to high schoolers has been just so awesome, and I've just enjoyed it more than I can say.
Talk a little bit about what you said about suffering and how it causes thriving if we strive in the power of the Holy Spirit.
Well, a lot about the definition is of suffering, of trauma. Trauma definition, and this is the secular definition, is that when you have a worldview that's got certain expectations for how the world ought to be, for how life ought to be, and then something happens that utterly destroys your expectations, shatters them, this is what you would consider to be a traumatic moment. So one of the ways you can work through trauma is simply to ask yourself, do you hold a proper view of the world? So should you expect these kinds of things? Can you make sense of your suffering? Does it fit in the overarching story that your worldview provides for you about how life is? And that's why talking about and learning about a Christian worldview is so important. Do you have a properly informed, robust Christian worldview that describes the role of suffering, the role of trauma? Do you expect it? Is it the kind of thing that your Christian worldview has no space for? Another way of saying this is there's a story that every worldview tells. And if you think you are suffering right now, you often feel like you're in the last chapter of the story. But if you can figure out what chapter you're in, and if you're certain that the final chapters of this story will be awesome, well, then you can power through these chapters. It turns out every story has ascending action, a climactic moment, which is often traumatic, and then it has descending action toward a resolution. That's the way every story is written. Well, your story is written that way too. And it's just tempting to feel like when you're in the climactic moment that you're in the final chapter. But you're not. This is why Jesus, for example, could hang on a cross, yet be calm enough to be able to say, thief on the cross next to me, relax. You're going to be with me in paradise today. Father, please forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And oh, by the way, John, this is Mary. Mary, this is John. This is your mother from now on. He's very calm. He's very calm. Everyone around him is crying and going hysterical, but he's very calm. Why? Because he knows what chapter he's in. He knows he's only on Friday. Sunday is coming. When you know what chapter you're in, you're calm, right? So trauma often is just us trying to figure out what chapter are we in.
That's actually a really good, deep thought. And I know everyone who's listening are probably saying to themselves, well, what chapter am I in right now? And for many, it's going to be a source of confusion. They're not going to be able to answer that question, Jim.
Well, and that's because they're looking at their story as just their story. Like what if your story is just part of God's overarching story? Because if it is, you don't have to worry about it. You're not writing your story. You just have to figure out where you are in God's story. Turns out God's story is already written. If you're reading scripture, you'll see what God's story is. And this is why so many people have suffered so well as Christians, because they know how the story ends.
Yeah, it's powerful. So good. Well, as we start to wrap up our time, I have really loved this particular interview with you, and I feel that there's been some incredible pearls that I think have come out of this hour, and I can't wait to go listen to it again. I was saying to Wyatt that this is one of those hours with Jim Wallace where I feel like the curtain got pulled back a little bit, and you even shared even some more personal things, which I have just loved. So thank you for your vulnerability.
Well, and I was talking to my son the other day, and he's 37, and he says, Dad, you're my best friend. And I thought, how'd that happen?
Wow.
He said, well, I think it happened because I always felt like you just said what was on your mind. And when you're vulnerable, it makes it easy to, people who are vulnerable with you. So I just want to encourage people that, it turns out that part of this internet world we're in is that we create personas that are publicly accessible, and we don't really let anybody know who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
Who cares what am I trying to protect here, right? Who cares who you're being? So in the end, if I do that with my own family, then I'm only as close to my family as you are to the world that doesn't really know you. So I think the first thing we got to be vulnerable, just honest about who we are.
And very authentic. So that is something I really appreciate. And I appreciate you, and I'm anxious for you to get back to your grandkids now and have a great evening with them.
Thanks, Bill. I hope you don't hear them in the background, but I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thanks, Jim. J. Warner Wallace has been my guest. You can continue to go learn more about him. I've given you his website a couple of times, but I will do it again because I want you to go there and check it out. coldcasechristianity.com. That's coldcasechristianity.com. And I want you to know that if you have a prayer request, and you need to let us know what it is, we can always pray for you, and you can go to the prayer tab at myfaithradio.com. We get prayer requests every day, and we take them seriously. So thank you for showing us that you need us to pray with you, because we will stand with you and pray with you. You can go to myfaithradio.com. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Joe Dallas is going to join me, and I'm looking forward to that conversation. We'll be back in just a minute. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.